I can understand how someone can be homeless in a place like this.
I don't blame that woman. I blame the politicians.
Sometimes it's not a choice. You know, I do work, I do have a job.
I didn't go to no shelter yet because I don't have no ID. For two, it's hard to try to talk to people and they don't even know who you are.
In Starbucks, you can get hot water from the machine, small, medium, or large, no charge. You can use their sweeteners, they don't charge. You can use their shakers, cinnamon, chocolate, nutmeg. You can mix it right there, and then you add your own tea bag. And the refills for all ages at Starbucks, if you have a receipt, is 54 cents. Isn't that nice?
Between 30 and 60 people walk into my office a day. And of that, 90% walk in either for applying for an apartment or in the process of being evicted from their current apartments, or because they need some social services, food stamps, public assistance in order to stay in their homes and be able to eat. We have to make sure that these apartments that are being built in our community have deep affordability.
Most of the people, when they talk affordable housing, you need to make $45,000 as a minimum. Well, what is $45,000? You know, most of my people, sometimes they're only making $20,000, and I have to be careful to use that number because they may be less. Can they pay $1,500 in this community now? $2,000? This is what we are facing right now.
We are not building enough affordable housing for those families that are at the lowest economic spectrum. The families making less than $30,000 a year, which is essentially minimum wage.
And this is wrong.
It is a total and utter disgrace.
The supply of affordable housing is something that the mayor had promised that he would deliver a certain number of affordable housing units. He has not come anywhere close to that number, and he's just trying to come off as this progressive voice of the city of New York, but have literally left thousands of people behind in his term.
What you'll see is landlords raising the rents to astronomical numbers. We have a housing crisis, a housing shortage. They make good money off of renting out their apartments to wealthy people.
We come back to the same point about the real estate industry. They're interested in a return for investment.
I'm beginning to not to talk anymore about affordable housing. That word for me, affordable housing, is not something other than it's not going to be affordable. That's the way I look at it.
The rezonings that allowed more developers to move into neighborhoods that had not been attractive accelerated the gentrification and the displacement, adding to more homelessness.
We're gonna get a ton of apartments on the waterfront on 10th Avenue.
The city has this mandatory inclusionary housing so that they get some affordable housing, but the affordable housing is not affordable to the people who live in that area. Developers go to the City Planning Commission and ask for changes in zoning. So much of the city and state's support for luxury housing that's going begging right now. They can't unload these multi-million-dollar properties, and yet they have gotten special waivers for building higher than the allowed height.
What affordable housing mean? What is affordability? People get confused. Oh, affordable housing, that we can build that. No, but can we build low-income housing? It's a big difference.
The apartments that are being built, they don't allow people to be able to rent those apartments. They're now catering to a new community that they wish to attract into their luxury towers. That is not a solution.
If the mayor has managed to condemn some areas to build schools, we should be condemning some areas to build affordable housing. And the mayor has the power to do so. If it's good for the mayor and for all the mayors before him to give so much territory to developers to build these unaffordable apartments that our people cannot pay for. Do not wait for the federal government to do so. They're not going to do it.
Although we're doing a lot of great things around building affordable housing, we're not making a significant dent in the system.
People cannot afford to stay in their homes. The number one driver right now is just rising rents and stagnant wages.
Most of the communities where you see the greatest threat of displacement, of rising rents, are communities of color, immigrant communities where you have a lot of residents that are living on a fixed income. They're at or below the federal poverty level, and they really have nowhere to go. If you push them out, there's nowhere to go. How can we attack homelessness? How can we look at our city's housing agency in terms of the new construction, opportunities for women and children to be housed in permanent housing?
Do a better measurement between the income that is coming in versus the cost of living that is taking place right now in our city, in our state.
We've been working really hard to make sure that the rent laws were changed. People that are in their homes should remain in their homes.
And where somebody is a terrible landlord and doesn't provide services to people,
harassing you, being denied basic necessities like heat, hot water, having no gas, the elevator's out, I can't walk up the steps, I have a disability.
Instead of fines that never get paid, maybe you take them to court and you seize their property.
Some of the processes that the landlords were using to get people out were just cruel. People were being accused of things that weren't true. And so we were seeing that people were being taken to court. We were seeing places where landlords were sending eviction notices to the entire buildings, just fishing to find one or two people that they could actually get out.
If the cases are very extreme, the city will litigate these cases and take landlords and owners to court. But then you languish in housing court. The families are not able to move in until that court case is settled, and that could take a while.
The first step always has to be stabilize them in their homes. And once we do that and we stop the growth of the crisis, then we can move on to all the myriad causes of homelessness.
Working women that do have an income, that have fallen on hard times, that are in a situation where they're doubled up, they are living with someone and that condition is no longer viable. They're forced with that awful choice of, do I go to PATH? Do I go to the shelter system with my kids to go through the process of getting my own housing? Or do I stay in a situation?
There are people who are living doubled up, tripled up in apartments. I know of a family that has 9 people living in a one-bedroom apartment. If anybody finds out that there's 9 people living in an apartment, maybe the whole apartment will even get evicted. Those people are on the brink of homelessness.
How do you change it? How do you get somebody who is a mayor who is not beholden to real estate interests?
If there's somebody, a family or an individual who's on the brink of falling into homelessness, we can stop that and give them the stability they need.
When you're just at that cusp, you can't make rent. When you need a little bit of help, if you want to give that supplemental income or support so they can stay where they are.
The voucher system is something that has huge problems. There's discrimination. A lot of landlords won't take them. What people have been talking about is making it so that it's kind of discrimination. If a landlord refuses the voucher, you're basically discriminating someone because they're poor.
You cannot deny a tenant an apartment, and that's what's been happening.
People will come in with a voucher.
They are in short supply.
And we can't find a landlord in the community that will take them.
And don't cover nearly enough as rents have escalated dramatically.
You can't use a voucher for an apartment that's more than $1,100, and they will pay from that $900. You can't find an $1,100 apartment. We have to look at making sure that people can access the vouchers and use them.
Even having a voucher doesn't guarantee you anything.
And of 100 people that walk in, maybe one lucky person will actually wind up in an apartment. But these applications are lotteries.
That vouchers, in any context, don't really work.
New York City is a right to shelter city. Because the homeless shelter system exists here and will take them in, it creates for these families a huge conflict.
Who populates our homeless shelters? They are women and children, families, mothers, single parent households raising children. That's the face of homelessness. It's women of color, immigrant women, women who may not speak English as a primary language, working women, women on fixed incomes.
When you are sent to a PATH office, which is where you go for your referral and interview intake into the homeless shelter, they give you temporary placement at a shelter. That's a temporary period while they investigate.
You are assessed in terms of your eligibility.
How that happen? Why you here? What are your needs? What is your mental, physical, capability, and then let's take it from there.
They have inspectors go out, visit the homes that you have provided as your previous residents, and they double check and make sure that you really are homeless and in need of housing.
If there's any other accommodations that a family member can do or anything else where the person can be housed.
Let's say you're denied under your first assessment. The city says, no, you provided us this address with your mom and you can live with your mom. But no, my mom doesn't want me there, but you can live there. They'll deny you. So then you have to go back through the process again and again and again until you get approved. And once you pass that process, you are housed in what we call a tier 2, which is a full-fledged shelter. You have a domestic incident, you could be in a domestic violence shelter. So whatever your classification is, you are assigned right to one of those tiers throughout the city. And you're in a building with other families, depending on your unit size. You're in a 1, 2, and or 3 bedroom. You could be in a studio if you have a small child. The situations that families and women and mothers go through every day is horrible. They survive because that's their only option. And when your only option is to survive for yourself and your children, you do what you have to do to make sure that you get to work every day, your kids get to school. That doesn't mean that you like the conditions. It means that you've accepted that this is your circumstance for now, but it's not permanent. And that's our job, to make your situation temporary to get you in long-term housing.
The city is swamped with the amount of people that are coming in, and they're doing their best. The problem is the state has walked away and is not a partner and is not helping them. We are trending upward.
Everybody playing the game with our homeless population, and because it's not a popular issue for people to get elected, they all promise, but there's no result.
Right now, the numbers are as bad as they were 80 years ago with the Great Depression.
So when you look at an issue like homelessness, that really faces a lot of families in New York City. We have a crisis. Many of them were displaced. They were priced out. They fell on hard times. Many of them could be victims of domestic violence in a really bad situation in terms of their public safety for themselves and children. Honestly speaking, what are women facing in the homelessness system? Women face unique challenges. I think about intergenerational poverty, where you have a grandma that was on the system, and then mom is on the system, and then that translates to daughter on the system.
There are currently 150,000 school-age children who are homeless in New York. Some of them are on the streets, and some are doubled up on other people's couches, but they are homeless, which is not only bad for them, but their prospects of becoming productive members of society is diminished, because it's harder to study, it's harder to stay on track, and what we find is generationally those kids are much more likely to wind up on public assistance or involved in the criminal justice system.
And we say, well, some of these children aren't doing well in school. You know, what a surprise.
Why can't we stop that intergenerational cycle of poverty, understanding that this is a temporary situation? This is not a lifestyle.
Tens of thousands of people, many of them women, who are working hard to support their families, but the only place they can afford to live is a shelter.
It's expensive to house people. It's expensive to put them up for shelters. It's expensive to have to provide transportation and other mechanisms for them to go about their daily lives.
We spend a lot of money housing people poorly.
There's other costs to homelessness, like cops responding, emergency rooms, housing courts churning out evictions. So homelessness costs taxpayers billions and billions of dollars.
We have to make sure that we stop talking about building more shelters and relocating people to hotels. If you look into my neighborhood, every hotel literally have at least 30% occupancy of homeless families. Those people get displaced. They don't getting the services that they need. They will tell you we're doing all that stuff. In reality, it's when you're there and you are on the ground and you're asking for services, it's more what I call pushing and passing the ball to somebody else. By just saying that they're not doing enough to really take these people to the next level. How can I go to a shelter and they wake me up at 6 a.m. and you cannot be coming back here until 3 p.m.? Where are I going to go if I don't have a job? Where are I going to go if it's raining? It's very difficult for them to get jobs. To tell them it's 6 a.m., breakfast is ready, 7 o'clock, you have to go, and come back at 5 p.m. because nobody can stay in the shelter is unacceptable and inhumane.
A lot of families, they're in shelters for years. The average wait time in a shelter today is 16 months. That's unacceptable in a city like New York. If we have a hotel with 50 clients with children and we move them out of the hotel, where are we going to put them?
Each and every one of us could wake up tomorrow with no job and nowhere to go and no supports and have to depend on government to put us in a safe place. And those safe places don't exist. We've heard the horror stories about people in shelters. We've heard about the violence. We've heard about women feeling unsafe in these locations. We've heard about the inability to access health care, menstrual hygiene. We know that these issues are unique to women who are living in these conditions.
And I completely understand somebody who's homeless saying, I'm not going there, for a variety of reasons. Many of the shelters are in buildings that are old and decrepit and unsafe.
It's institutional and depressing. It doesn't always feel clean. It certainly doesn't feel private.
The security services for many of the shelters are privately contracted security services for people. The security guards are actually people who I believe are one step away from being homeless themselves. There's crime, there's drug abuse, there's abuse from those security guards. So anybody who says, I'm not going to shelter because it's unsafe, I completely understand that because I've seen the conditions myself. If I was homeless, there's a real chance I'd say, you know what, I'm not going anywhere near that. I'd rather try to make it on the streets.
So you have a lot of mothers like that. Their families don't even know they're in shelters. They don't even know about this circumstance because they're so embarrassed to ask for help.
And I shouldn't be here if you can pay $1,600 a month. I can find an apartment. Then the landlord doesn't have to worry, just pay them. So they're keeping us here a little bit longer than necessary. They're making money.
There is a small select group of people who are making money off of increased numbers of people falling into homelessness.
We're spending $300 probably per night to put homeless people in hotels. Well, you know what? If you're going to do that and you think you do have the budget for it, just begin to build affordable housing for these folks.
Over the last 8 years, since the governor came into office, the homeless crisis continues to grow because he stops us from stopping the growth, okay? As a result, because in New York City by law we have to shelter people, the city has increased the amount of money it spends on shelters by almost $1 billion. After 4 years of trying to figure out why the governor of the state of New York, Andrew Cuomo, is trying to block the one thing that will stop the growth of the crisis, we have figured out that Governor Cuomo is in the shelter business. The governor, who used to work at Housing and Urban Development, so it's a cabinet level secretary position under Bill Clinton, you'd think he'd know about homelessness, and he does know about it, but what he's done is he's created a nonprofit which provides shelter. And that nonprofit has gotten tens of millions of dollars in new contracts, as well as other shelter providers throughout the state. It's a business. He opens a shelter. Shelter is called Help USA. That's the nonprofit. It's currently run by his sister, and he's in the shelter business, and he takes money from people in the shelter business. And if you're in the shelter business, business is good. So several years ago, when de Blasio first came into office, I think the numbers, and I may be off a little bit, used to be the city would spend $1.4 billion on shelters. It's a lot of money. Now we're up to 2.4 annually. And that money is going to contracts for these new providers of shelters. That's how the money is out of the taxpayer's pocket and into the pocket of people who run shelters. And the more people fall into homelessness, the more their business does well, and there's money to be made there. And that's the reason why the governor has been stopping the one thing that will stop the growth of the crisis. And New York State is now in bed with these shelter owners, led by a governor whom not many people know is in the business of homeless shelters. And that's why we're continuing to see the growth of homelessness in New York State. It's ugly, and I don't have any pleasure in reporting it, but that's the situation we're in.
Citizens of the New York City and our country believe that this is a problem that's been created by individual homeless person, and they are not welcome in our community. When it's the opposite. They was part of our community. They always been part of our community. They always been part of us.